My name is Chip Bearden. I got involved in soaring in 1965 when I was 14 years old, so you can do the math. Got about 3,000 hours, all gliders, no power time. This is my first, and I can guarantee you, my only book.
I'd like to think this is not my last book, but who knows? I mean, I wouldn't want to say I'm old, but this last week I was in an antique store and they didn't want to let me leave. But in any case, I started flying gliders back in 1962. You do the math. So that's, 62 years. Anyhow, a lot of it's about soaring. It's all about flying, and there's some stuff in there about air traffic control as well, because I did that for a while. Actually had to take a medical retirement because of the stress. I'm really only 30.
We will try to stick closer to the truth than Bill just did. Okay, how to write a bestseller in soaring. There's nothing we're going to talk about today that you can't find online. There are a gazillion sites about how to write your book. It can get confusing though, so we're going to try to clear up some of that. We're going to cover 3 areas. The writing part, how do you get the words down to your manuscript? How do you convert that manuscript into a finished book? And then how you sell that book to make millions of dollars and become famous. Is there anybody here who has a preference about what you'd like to see us spend more time on or to avoid? If you're all great writers, we can skip the first part entirely. All right, we'll just go through the whole sequence. The first big question, what type of book? Bill and I both wrote what we call a memoir. It's almost a biography because we started at a very early age and carry it through to present day times. You can write a narrative nonfiction, a history of your club, history of soaring, history of a contest, a how-to book. There are even books in fiction about soaring. I have one that goes back to the 60s. It's really quite good. The Clouded Sky by John Nicholson from Australia, if you've never read it. And then the first question after that is, why write your book? I wrote mine. It started out as an article about a really bad day I had. It was a flight I shared with my father at the Nationals in 1980, at the conclusion of which he crashed. It got a little long, and it turned into a full-length, book-length, almost self-therapy about the effect that crash had on me and the effect that soaring and marathon running had on my entire life. My target reader, I never really knew who that was. I always had an audience problem. Part of the time I was writing for soaring pilots, and the rest of the time I was hoping non-pilots would be able to appreciate it. I didn't lock in on soaring pilots as my audience until just before I published. Author platform, I've been involved in soaring for 60 years. I've been a marathon runner for 45 years. I've never been at the top of either of those pyramids, but I feel like I have enough credibility, and I've done some writing professionally. I thought, hey, I may be able to write a book that people would read. So that's my platform. Soaring plays a big role in my life. It's one of the central themes. It's not the only theme, but it is a central one. Bill, I think you might be a little bit different situation here.
Yeah, the whole impetus for writing the book, pardon me, for writing the book for me was I wanted to get all of these things that had happened over the past 62 years down in writing before I became too senile to remember any of this stuff like, well, I don't know, Joe Biden, somebody like that. Anyhow, oh, and I'm sorry, excuse me. Anyhow, so the whole idea was just to get all this down in black and white. I thought this would be kind of fun to write about. The central theme for my book, of course, is soaring. And the interesting thing about the book is if you choose to avail yourself of it, why, you can see how I've been able to apply my soaring background to various jobs that I've had. I spent 26 years as an air traffic controller before I got my airline job. But there were always occasions where I was able to apply something about soaring, like convincing a pilot taking off out of Denver in mountain wave conditions that he should probably come back and land and wait till the next day when the winds weren't blowing so strong, because he clearly had no idea what he was doing in a power plane in mountain wave. And this held true for flying out of Jackson Hole, Wyoming, with a first officer who'd never seen mountain wave, and I'd show him how to climb in a Brasilia and peg the VSI by taking advantage of the upside of the primary and the wave. So there are always opportunities to apply what I learned, and that's what I try to convey in the book. So I really didn't have a target reader in mind, simply because I did it for my own personal enjoyment, but I thought, well, you know, this isn't all that bad. Maybe people will really actually enjoy reading this thing. Who knows? So anyhow, that's the role the Soaring plays in my book.
Yeah, we both talk about target audience a lot. As you write your book, you'll find asking the question, should I define that term? What a thermal is, how to turn a glider, what sync is. And if you're writing for the soaring audience, you don't have to bother. If you're writing for a general audience, you better make sure they understand what those things mean. Okay, writing nuts and bolts, scheduling and time. Who here is under 40? All right. The rest of you can go home. It took me 43 years to write my book. So you don't have enough time. I started writing the article the night that my dad crashed, 1980. I published in 2023. For the first 20 years, it was an article. I would work on it for a while, put it away, sometimes for years. Finally, I realized it was going to be a book, and I would still put it away for up to a year and come back to it. Eventually, maybe 10, 15 years ago, I started working on it more regularly, and I'd say 5 years ago, I got serious, and then it was an almost everyday thing. But it took a long time to put it together. Bill, I think your story is a little bit different.
Just a bit. I started writing mine about 2.5 years ago, and I thought I better do this now before, again, as I said earlier, I get too senile to remember any of this foolishness. But I also tried to gear it. As I wrote the thing, I would go back and reread, and we'll talk about that in a moment, how many times we've done this, so that people who were not pilots could understand it. And I actually have a glossary in the back of my book just for that purpose, because there's a few arcane instances where I'm talking about air traffic control that if you don't have that background, you might understand what I'm talking about. But the bottom line is telling a story, and that's, I guess we're going to visit that a little later on in another slide.
Research. Bill refers to senility. All kidding aside, I don't trust my memory. So I cross-checked everything I possibly could using my logbooks. I've got one for flying, one for running. My notes. My dad took a ton of photos when we were growing up. They're all on slides, which are all date stamped, which was very convenient, I found out. Soaring magazine, articles, my contest results. Soaring magazine's archive is really, really good. You can do a lot of searches. I spent a lot of time there. I tried to check everything in the book to make sure it was factually correct. The funny thing is, two guys I used to fly with back in the, 70s, I guess, I contacted them to make sure I was square on a couple of details. One swore up and down he had never flown the contest where my dad crashed. I said, that may be true, but your name is on there, such a list. Other guys, I made a funny comment about, you did the only low pass for an outlanding I've ever seen. He said, when was that? I said, Minden, 81. He said, I completed every task. I said, well, the results say you landed out twice. So our memories are not what they used to be. So cross-check this stuff. Bill, research?
Well, I was probably not as thorough, not even remotely as thorough as Chip is as far as the research goes, because again, I relied primarily on my logbook to jog my memory, which worked for the most part pretty well. But now that I've written the book, I realize there's an awful lot of stuff that I really didn't include in the book. So I'm going to work on the second version of it and probably, hopefully, delve into some of the things that were not covered as thoroughly as they might be.
Writing styles. You go to the websites about how to write your book. They talk about discovery writers and structured writers. And the difference is, do you sit down and just spew words, or do you do an outline first and then write to it? I was more of a discovery writer. I wrote this long article first, which is a piece of my life right in the middle. I started writing other stories and rearranging them. At one point, I actually took all my stories, typed up little summaries, and laid them out in pieces of paper and arranged them on a table in order, however they made the most sense. I was very definitely a discovery writer, freeform writer. Bill, I think your experience was different.
Somewhat. You could say that I used my logbook as my outline for the thing. So I guess in that respect, we're probably a little bit different. By the way, just a quick break, a commercial break. Both of our books are available at the SSA table here in the auditorium, should your curiosity be piqued enough that you want to buy the book.
Great pitch. By the way, discovery writing and outline or structured writing, they're both valid. It's whatever you're comfortable with. Sometimes people get blocked. They can't get started. And the answer may be just start writing and worry about how it's going to be organized later.
I share a thought on that particular line of thinking. If you're starting to write about something, one of the things I discovered as I wrote, I would get bogged down in the story, and I'm thinking, I'm just kind of roaming along here aimlessly and not really saying what I want to say. So I put it aside for a day or two and kind of cogitate over the issue. You realize, of course, if you're 60 or older, you no longer think, you cogitate. In any case, I found that to be fairly effective. Put the thing down, give it a day or two, kind of let the thought gin up in your mind, and then get back after it.
The other danger is if you're our age, you put it aside for a day or two, you forget what you wrote. Very, very true. Telling the story, no matter what you write, possible exception of a how-to book, you are telling a story. It's like you're in a group of people telling your funny story, your serious story. That means you don't just recite in a nice monotone what you had for dinner, what you had for breakfast, lunch, dinner. You need some ups and downs. There are lots of charts and graphs on the internet, but basically, from the beginning of the book to the end of the book, there should be changes. I actually went through my book near the end and plotted out the upbeat points, the downbeat points, and made sure there was enough contrast that it would keep people's interest. That's something you can do near the end, but as you're writing, try to introduce that. It does mean you're going to have to confess some mistakes. Otherwise, the downbeat moments won't ring true. I had a very confessional, tell-all book. I'm told maybe too much so, but that's the way I chose to treat it, to introduce the different levels.
I think that's very important, the idea of telling a story. An example of that would be an article I wrote for Flying Magazine in November 2014 called Why Fly Gliders. And I started the thing by talking about taking off out of Aspen, Colorado, in a Super Cub, and at 300 feet, the engine quit. And then I stop at that particular point and go into all the mechanics of flying gliders, and not so much about the energy management. Of course, that's an important part of it. But the emphasis that I placed on this article, should you choose to go look it up, was how to read the sky. And one of the interesting things that, I don't know how many of you folks have ever watched Marcus Welby, MD, clearly not the young folks, but I happened to be watching it one night, something I almost never did. And William Shatner was in the left seat of this Cessna 206. They were flying from the res to civilization. The weather's going to hell in a handbasket. Shatner is sweating bullets at this particular point in time and wondering what he's doing. And in the right seat is Chief Dan George, who is a little big man for some of you that remember that. In any case, he's sitting there looking like totally nonplussed about the whole thing. And Shatner is going, I don't know what to do. And Chief Dan George says, let down over there. And Shatner looks at him like, what the hell do you know? And Chief Dan George says one of the most profound things I've ever heard on television, which takes a lot. He says, you mean you fly and you don't read the sky?
Nuts and bolts. Quick slide here. You need a strong opening line. Here are some examples of books that you may have encountered or read. I like the last one especially. I can't quote that, but if you've read The Martian by Andy Weir, you'll know what I mean. These are our opening lines. Take a quick scan. We're just going to go right by it. The only comment I'll make is that mine is at the bottom of the page there. I worked on mine for years. It first crept into my book about 15 years ago. I started trying to polish it about 5 years later. I didn't really stop until I published. Bill?
Exactly. Well, of course, obviously my inspiration was the fact that my dad was a fighter pilot in World War II. And he actually was at the airport the day I soloed. And my first landing was a little long because I didn't have an instructor in there and forgot to compensate for the lack of weight. The next two landings were right where they're supposed to be. And so I taxied up to the tie-down area. Of course, the airplane's on the ground. I'm still 3 feet up. And there's Dad sitting in the parking lot. And I get out of the car, and he said, you landed too long on the first one. You should have gone around. I thought, gee, that's great positive enforcement. But the whole idea is to hook somebody with the first paragraph, if you can, with whatever you're writing.
It's entertainment. They're not going to read your book because they want to be smarter, for the most part, at least not in my case. You've got to hook them early and then keep them hooked. One of the hooks that we talk about is turning pages. You've all read books where you get to the end of a chapter, and it's pretty obvious there's a cliffhanger. It's like wait for the next weekly episode in a TV series. I think we both worked pretty hard to keep those cliffhangers at the end of every chapter, to provide a foreshadowing what was going to happen. Sometimes we'd make reference to it explicitly, sometimes it was just sort of a hint. But again, it shouldn't be a flat line. You should have ups and downs. Every time they come to a turning point in your book, tell them something that makes them want to read some more. My book is 380 pages long. They're not going to read it just because it's good for them. The thing where we differed, I think, is the conclusion. I worried over mine for literally years. I couldn't figure out how to draw my story to a close. And it wasn't until 5 years ago or so where I finally realized I'd been torturing myself for far too long, trying to validate my self-worth through running marathons and flying glider contests. I relaxed and said, it's okay. You don't have to do that. And about that time, I finished second in the Nationals for the first time. So I said, well, whether it's true or not, now I'm validated. And that became my conclusion. That's where I cut it off. I said, I probably can't get better than this. So that's my conclusion. Bill, you had a very different approach with yours.
Well, one of the things I tried to do was to make the book a teaching tool as well. I started teaching glider flying back in 1963 or 4, I think, before there was such a thing as a glider CFI. You were allowed to instruct on the basis of your commercial ticket. And so once they changed that over to glider CFI, why they just gave me a glider CFI ticket. So I've tried to make the book a teaching tool. One of the examples of that is where I came within a hair's breadth of killing myself flying in an experimental aircraft that was designed for racing at Reno called the NXT. And you have to buy the book if you want to get the whole thing. But bottom line is, base to final, I snap rolled the airplane, not intentionally, at 400 feet, managed to recover. And when you think about that, my guardian angel was clearly watching over my shoulder, because that's not something you recover from as a general rule. You usually end up buying the farm doing something like that. And it was all because I did some stupid things, all of which I talked about in the course of that particular chapter, because I think it's important for people to be able to read something like that and take a lesson from it and say, well, I certainly don't want to do what Hill did.
Yeah, if you go back and read some of George Moffat's stuff, he's one of my idols for a long, long time. He does confess his mistakes. Probably not in as much detail as he should, but it's not all about how I won the world championships multiple times. He confesses the good days and the bad days. Okay, anything you find on how to write a book is going to use this phrase, show, don't tell. Anybody seen that before? What it really means is, don't tell somebody you're mad. Show them by describing it. Don't tell somebody you're in love. Show them by talking about how your heart leaps, you were carried aloft by a million butterflies under the sun. I'm going to pop up 2 examples here. Bill, the first one is yours, of something where the top line is the tell. That's what he could have said, and the bottom paragraph is what he actually said.
It's interesting, the one guy to raise his hand over this whole thing is John Good, who's sitting back there. And he just finished writing a story on the World Championships, and it's probably one of the better reads you're going to find in Soaring magazine for a long time. Thanks for doing that, John. Great job. Yeah, the bottom line was just learning how to, actually, I kind of lied to the guy, because I think I had 17 hours of total flying time after flying a little Piper Colt and wanted to check out in the J3. But as you can tell by the paragraph itself, things did not go well at the onset. But the bottom line is you want to be as descriptive as possible so that you draw the reader in with what you're saying and the idea in mind of imparting some knowledge about what happened, or at least amusing them.
This is my example. It goes back to 1982 at the Nationals in Elmira. I'll let you read the paragraph. One of the worst days in soaring up to that point. I could have just said it was a really bad day. And it took a lot more words to convey the feeling, but that's what the experts say you should do. They say avoid using words like angrily, softly, happily. Show those things, don't just tell them. So we got a lot more to cover, so I'm going to blow that. Just keep that in mind. Show, don't tell. Short words and sentences. This is not my strength. I speak a lot of words. I write the same way. Try and cut it down into short sentences. and know when to break the rule. Oops. Avoid cliches, obviously. The good thing about the second point is the repetitive words, the cliches, the overused words, the software that's available these days finds that stuff for you. It'll flag the fact that you just used the same word 4 times in the previous 2 paragraphs. And then finally, the first draft is just that. Most books I read about writing say, tell your story, write it all down the first time, and then go back and fix it. Write, edit, rewrite, re-edit, over and over and over again. Don't fall in love with certain paragraphs of stories. I can't tell you how many stories I have on my hard drive that were in the book at one point, and I finally pulled them out. That could be my volume 2, except I don't really intend to write a second book. Storyboards. I did actually arrange all my stories on paper several times and rearrange them into chapters, into parts. And finally, multiple drafts. And here's another one where Bill and I are on different points in the spectrum. I have, I guess I can confess this. I have a little over 600 drafts of my book on my hard drive. And a draft is, I would work on it, start to finish for 2 to 3 weeks and say, you know what, I need to save that under a different name. And then do it again, and again, and again. It goes back to 1980. I have over 600 different versions of my book.
I think I may have 50 drafts or thereabouts. Bottom line is you have to go back and reread it and see, did I miss something? Did I offend anybody? That's never been an issue for me. But in any case, so way too many Snickers there. Yeah. Anyhow, you want to be fairly succinct about what you're writing, but by the same time, you want to write in such a fashion that you draw people in and you use whatever words are appropriate to describe what you need to describe on a given task. Try to avoid big words like telephone pole and peanut butter, but there are times when one particular word might be just exactly what you need, and something you just don't want to overdo it or totally fall in love with your own writing. You've got to be as objective as possible, and that ain't easy to do, believe me. And that, of course, is where why we want to have the book edited and have some test people reading the thing, and Chip's going to get into that.
It's never good enough. I have a new appreciation for stories I hear about novelists who have been working on their novel for 20 or 30 years. It never should be enough. At some point, you have to draw the line, but don't be afraid to write a new draft. I was told one time, hey, Chip, just start over again. Write the whole thing from scratch and see how it looks, how happy you are with it. Okay, Bill referred to editing. Find yourself an editor. I had 2. One I got matched up with on one of these online websites that match editors with writers. He was very, very good, but he was expensive. The second one was a daughter of a friend of mine who did it on the side. It was during COVID. She was a teacher. She had lots of time on her hands, and she gave me a lot of interactive feedback. She was wonderful. Neither one of my editors was a pilot. They knew nothing about flying. They both gave me some great feedback of how to structure the book, changes I should make. Very, very honest. I didn't like their critiques all the time, but I usually took them to heart. Bill, I think your experience was a little bit different.
Somewhat. I have a good friend of mine who transcribes medical stuff from doctors, did the first edit on the book, and then everybody here knows Dan Johnson, right? Dr. Dan Johnson. Anyhow, he did the second edit, and he ripped me a new one, which was good because it needed that. It needed somebody with a really objective eye who is not afraid to call a spade a shovel. So he did that, and that was really helpful having that. And unfortunately, I didn't have any beta readers, which I think Chip's going to tell us about.
Yeah, giving a copy to your friends or to your relatives, your family, is not going to do it. You may be different, but my family is not going to tell me that sucks. But every book in the world says, find yourself some beta readers. People are going to read the near to final version and tell you what they really think. I sent it out to 2 or 3 pilots, 2 or 3 runners, because mine's heavily involved in marathon running, and 2 or 3 general readers, friends of mine over the years. I got feedback from almost all of them. Some of them went through it line by line and gave me line edits. I incorporated nearly all of that feedback in the book. I would not have gotten it unless I had shipped those things out. It's tough because you haven't published yet. You know it's not final yet, but at some point you have to draw a line and say, tell me what you think. Sensitivity readers. Uh, there are people out there who read books and say, this line could be offensive to somebody. It sounds very PC and woke, but I made sure that in my beta readers, I had at least a couple of women in each category. They all gave me feedback on the book. Most of it I was not aware of. I took it all into account in my final copy. We're all biased in different ways. So make sure that when you have people read your book before you publish, that you're giving it to people who will tell you honestly, you've offended somebody, or you could offend somebody, Chip. There's a better way of saying that.
Well, Chip, of course, is right on about sensitivity traders, and I'm a very, very sensitive individual. I was not too concerned about pissing off Karen. I really didn't care about that, but I really, in all honesty, I tried to go through that and say, if I've said anything that's offensive, a good example of that was interacting with Dennis Tito. Everybody know who Dennis Tito is? The first guy to go to the moon with the Russians, or not the moon, but the satellite. And then in any case, I ended up spending 3 years as his safety pilot in the back of his DG, and then later on the jet-powered Arcus. I guess you've heard about that, or you probably will. In any case, we were down in Bariloche, down in Argentina, and we had an issue with the oxygen, and we had to do a workaround. Now, bear in mind, for those of you that have not met Dennis, he's vertically challenged and wears wedgies. So we're getting a big laugh back there. She knows who I'm talking about. So anyhow, we're riding back to the airport, and I said, Dennis, we've got a workaround. It's not an issue. The oxygen problem has been resolved. And Dennis looked at me and said, well, I'm still not happy. And I had the overwhelming urge to say, well, Dennis, if you're not happy, which one of the 7 dwarfs are you? But I decided that probably would not be a good idea to say that. So sensitivity is an important issue.
I'm going to give the mic right back to you, Bill, because you can use social media in the editing process. I did not, which was probably a mistake.
The primary social media that I've used, well, I guess we'd count the podcast as a social media, wouldn't we? Yeah, I did. Anyhow, so what I did, I've published some of my older stories from the book on Facebook, and then a couple of new ones that I'm writing. So we talked about the conclusion a little earlier, and Chip had a conclusion to his book, and mine, the last page, is basically to be continued. So social media is a good way to get the word around about your stuff, to see if anybody's really interested in reading it.
I'll be very honest, I was basically afraid to publish in social media before I got the book out. So I just didn't use it. And it's a nice way to get feedback. Okay, there will be a test on this. The only important thing you need to note here is that the blue boxes up at the top, that's the way the publishing business used to work. An author would find a literary agent, and you had to talk them into taking you on as a client. That agent would sell your book to a publisher. Publisher would design it, print it, and ship it to the bookstores, and that's how we readers bought our books. That all changed. There was a parallel path up at the top, independent print shops, vanity press. You could get your book printed, maybe 50 copies, and give them to your friends. It was very expensive, but a lot of people did it. Everything in the bottom half of the page is new as of about 25 or 30 years ago. The first thing that changed was Amazon. They rose to be a huge power in book distribution. You no longer had to rely on the book publishers. The second thing was the rise of ebooks. All of a sudden, you didn't have to have a print book. You could publish an ebook and never have it go to print. And you didn't need a publisher for that. The third thing was these guys, print on demand. For some time now, there's been technology where if you order one of my books, Amazon will take the order, print the inside of the book, print the cover, glue them together, and ship that one book. So with that technology, you no longer needed the publishers. So I took they call it independent publishing, it's self-publishing. I took the bottom route. Amazon has a print-on-demand division, and these print-on-demand aggregators, they all do the same thing. You give them your manuscript, they agree to fill orders and ship to either Amazon or these online sites. If you do a search on my book, it shows up on Barnes & Noble and Walmart and Blackwell's in the UK and a German bookstore. None of those stock my book, but my book is in the big catalog that a company called Ingram, right there in the middle. 17 million titles, and mine is one of them. So I have to figure out a way to get people to order it from Barnes & Noble, but it's out there. I never went through the publishers to do that. So this is a dramatic change in publishing if you're not aware of it. It's fairly easy to get your book into Amazon and these other guys. Basically, you format it the way they want to. They have a website. You create an account. You take your manuscript, convert it to a PDF, make sure the margins are correct, the page size is correct, give it to them. They'll actually help you design a cover if you can't get one on your own. And they'll bless your book in a couple of weeks, and all of a sudden, you're in print. Or your ebook is out almost immediately. It's very easy to publish. The cliche is that everybody has at least one book in them. And the truth is, most of those books are not so good. But if you want to publish your book, it's very easy and straightforward and very cheap to do it now. Okay, nuts and bolts. The interior design is what a book looks like inside. What fonts you use, what page size you have, what the chapter headings look like, whether you have page numbers or not, and so on and so forth. I did all that myself. I did not use a traditional publisher, so I had to do it myself. There are lots of guides out there. I made a lot of mistakes. I'm happy with the result, but it took a long time to get there. Cover design. I am not very artistic. So I used a service that matches people up with designers. I put out my creative brief. I said, here's what I want to do. It's a book about flying gliders. Here's some examples of what a glider looks like. Here's some book covers I like a lot. And one of them was Into Thin Air by John Krakauer, if you've read that book. I love that cover with all the blue sky and the clouds and the mountain. I said, design me something that evokes this kind of feeling. I got over 100 different designs back. These are the final 6, along with the little clever nicknames that we used. Creepy Kid, Empire of the Sun, Sandstorm, Warzone, T-Shirt Boy, and I'll Fly Away, which is the one we finally settled on. I iterated those back and forth. I said, change this. Can you do this, but make it darker? And finally came to the final design. And then I ran those 6 by my beta reader group and said, which do you like best? And they had a ball giving me critiques on the cover designs. They did not come to a consensus, but the last 2 designs were the lower right 2. T-Shirt Boy and I'll Fly Away. We finally decided T-Shirt Boy was too romance novelesque. That's the self-publishing route. You do a lot of this yourself. Bill, you took the traditional publishing route, which was very different.
I really got lucky with this whole thing. I had written the book, and I got to thinking about publishing it. And in my neighborhood in New Mexico, where I live, there's a fellow who writes Western novels, and he's in his mid-80s and still writing these things. And I approached him one day, and I said, I've just written a book, and I wanted to ask you about getting it published. And he said, well, here's the name of my publisher. Send the manuscript to him, and if he likes it, he'll publish it. I did, and he did, or they did. In any case, I didn't even think about the cover. Didn't even give it a second's thought. And the publisher came up with that cover, which the shot of the mountain wave was from Argentina. And, of course, they have the sailplane in there. So I really got lucky in that regard, and it didn't cost me a penny to do any of this. So I was very fortunate in that regard. But the only place you'll find my book is on Amazon, or over and above, back in the room there with the SSA, and at least one of the 2 museums, the one in Moriarty, and I'm going to talk to the folks up there in New York and see if I can't get them to pick up some copies of my book for publication. So I was very fortunate in that regard. I didn't go the route that Chip did. He's a lot more organized than I am. I'm kind of helter-skelter.
I had more time on my hands than Bill did, I think. Real straightforward here. You can have a print book, you can have ebook, and you can have only an ebook if you choose to. There are millions of titles that aren't ever in print. They're in ebook form. I actually converted mine into an audiobook using AI. Didn't cost me a dime. It's not the highest quality audiobook, but it's a lot better than I had thought it would be. I don't sell a lot of audiobooks, but who here has a subscription to Spotify? I know you guys do. If you have a Spotify subscription, you can listen to my book for free. You don't have to buy it. Well, I shouldn't say it that way, but anyway, you pick the format. There are actually some books out there that are only available in audiobook. It's very flexible these days. Distribution. We're both on Amazon. My book is available through retailers. It's never stocked. You have to have them order it, but you can order it through Barnes & Noble. I'm in the National Soaring Museum and SSA. You're in the Southwest Soaring Museum, SSA. Neither one of us is doing direct sales per se. I have a website, but I'm not doing transactions. But we will sell you copies of our books after the meeting here. And I have sold a fair number at contests. It's amazing the number of people who come up to me and say, Chip, can you sell me a copy of your book? And they want it signed, of course, but there's a fair amount of that.
I don't know what I could add to that over and above saying that, again, that Amazon is carrying a copy of the book. If you go to Amazon to buy it that way, you want to go by the title and the author. Otherwise, it kind of leads you around the primrose path before you actually finally get to my book.
I will say Bill's book is hard to find. He has a common last name, and the title overlaps with 2 or 3 other books that sound almost the same. Mine is relatively easy, but I probably should have picked a different title. Goodbye, Papa Golf has the Quran kind of connotation with some people. They think it's a golf book. I'll get to that in a minute. Marketing. I'm not going to spend a lot of time on this because there are tons of websites and consultants out there. But basically, the channels that I have chosen to go after were reviews. Bill did my review in Soaring magazine for me. Really nice job. Liked it a lot. Didn't cost me a dime. Online reviews. Turns out your online reviews on the Amazon site are critical with Amazon. They pay a lot of attention to that. So if you have 2 or 3 reviews, you're nothing to Amazon. If you get up around 50, they start to do things like saying, hey, people who bought this book also bought Chip's book. I just had that happen the first time this week. I don't have 50 reviews yet, but I'm hoping. Actually, nobody gets out of the room unless they promise to give me a good review today. I've done a little bit on social media. We both have my Facebook site. Nobody under 40 is on Facebook anymore, but I don't really care. That's not my market anyway. I tried some paid ads on Amazon. I sold 1 book. I need to go back and do it right, but that's available. Podcasts. Who has listened to Harry Tenkate's The Thermal Podcast? Almost nobody. It's a great podcast, and we both have segments on there. I did 1 book signing up at National Soaring Museum. They bought a bunch of books. I drove up 3.5 hours during IBSM and sat there for 2 days and signed books. Sold a fair number of books. I have not used public relations actually, Bill, you've done a better job with networking than I have, among other things.
Oh, the networking works out pretty well. But getting back to the business of the reviews, it's amazing what you'll find on Amazon. Fortunately, the few, I think there are 3 or 4 reviews of my book on Amazon, and they're all positive. But when I posted something about writing the book on Facebook, an FO that I'd flown with in my airline days with SkyWest, this is a guy that we had some problems interacting, and he basically said I wouldn't read anything that son of a bitch wrote. So, but made a lot of friends and a few enemies flying. But that happens. That's just all part of the game. You got to be willing to kind of call it like it is. So, if you should go through Amazon to get the book as opposed to getting it here, please feel free to write a review, and of course, only write one if it's a good one.
Yeah, I am very straightforward when I sell somebody a book. I say, tell me what you really think. I don't care whether it's good or bad. Let me know what you think. Just don't do it on Amazon. Don't do it publicly. I'm going to spend 30 seconds on this, I think. There are a ton of tools available to writers these days using technology. Most of us write in Microsoft Word. There are other writing platforms. Scrivener is a very popular one. You can all look Google Docs, Vellum for Mac users, Atticus. You can look them up and see what they do. Editing. We all use spell check, sometimes to our misfortune. Grammarly is pretty good. Pro Writing Aid is the next best thing to having an editor sitting next to you. It does a wonderful job of editing your material, not just spell check and grammar. It tells you if you use too many words, long sentences. Readsy has some stuff online. I did my ebook conversion through Calibre, which is one of the tools over to the right. It's free. It was pretty good when it came out of the machine. I just had to change some things because I wanted the formatting a certain way. Podcasts. I'm a marathon runner, or was up until last November. So I had lots of long training runs. I'd be out there for 3, 4, or 5 hours. I took my phone with me and a Bluetooth headset and listened to podcasts. The Creative Pen was my favorite. I've listened to probably literally 500 of her podcasts over the last 5 years. You learn a lot just listening. You can do it when you're driving along. And then there's some websites. Kindlepreneur is a great one. Reedsy, Amazon, KDP. There's a ton of information out there. You just have to know, you have to try it basically and see what works for you. If anybody who wants more information about this, contact me after the meeting and I'll be happy to send you whatever I've got. But a lot of this is just whatever suits your purpose. Okay, this is the last slide. Our funny stories, so to speak. One of the things that Amazon does for you is it allows you to pick the category of your book. So when you send them your file, you say, mine's a memoir or biography, mine's an aviation book, but you can drive it down to the lowest level of detail. I said, mine is an air sports and recreation book. Great, there's not that many air sports and recreation books out there. So I publicized it on Facebook and on RAS, and as a result, a lot of you people bought my book the first few weeks. I was thrilled when I became the #1 new release in air sports. I mean, there weren't that many air sports books out there, but I wrote a bestseller. We were not jerking your chain here in terms of the way we title this. I wrote a bestseller. For about 10 days, my book was at the top of the list. I was crushed when I found out that Amazon also has its own way of categorizing books, and because of my title, #1 new release in golf biographies. It took me months to get them to take that down. They said, it's a valid category. I said, yeah, it is, but if somebody buys my book expecting a golf book, they're gonna send it back to you. They finally stopped it, but it took forever. The horror story is, this popped up on Amazon about a month after I published. Summary and analysis of Goodbye Papa Golf. There were 43 books just like that by the same author with the same cover. What they did was they took my book, dumped it through an AI, and cranked out a short summary. It was actually pretty damn good, I have to admit. And they were charging $5 for it. I have no idea how many they sold. They finally took it down. But artificial intelligence is wonderful. I use it a lot. I didn't use it for this book because it came out too late. But they can take an entire book and summarize it now. It's amazing. I haven't even started to use it for graphics yet or for images. But for text, it's a wonderful tool. Reader interactions. I know Bill has a couple he wants to talk about. I had my most enjoyable, most moving reader interaction up in Elmira. We were sitting on the grid waiting for it to clear, which is about all we did in Elmira this year. The weather sucked. And a guy came by. I know him casually. I phoned with him for about 10 years. He stopped and said, Chip, I want to thank you for your book. I'm thinking, okay, that's nice to hear. He said, your book helped me reevaluate my relationship with my father and with my son. And I was just, how often do we get feedback like that in our lives? That made the whole experience, 43 years worthwhile right there. I made a difference in somebody's life. Didn't expect that, but it was wonderful to get that kind of feedback.
We're about out of time, but I'd like to say that, as I pointed out to Chip on numerous occasions, as far as computer stuff goes, I'm a total Luddite. But I did use the MS Word, but having seen what Chip has presented to you about various places you can go to get help, for the Grammarly or however that's pronounced, that's certainly one I'm going to use at some point in time. I guess we're at the point now where we'll see if you have any questions from the audience. Yes, ma'am.
Well, Chip, you never mentioned how little money you get out of when you self-publish. That is, the publisher gets most of it on each book. And the other thing is, it took me almost 2 years to find a title or create a title that was catchy.
Yeah.
And that's another aspect of the self-publishing.
I don't have 600 different titles, but I have about a dozen. If I were to do it over again, I might pick something other than Goodbye Papa Golf. That word golf in there has caused me all kinds of problems. I knew it would, I just never realized the extent to which that would flow through the system. The money, I'm not sure what you get per book. Amazon or the other print-on-demand vendors take a big chunk of it. I make about as much on a print book as I do on an ebook, interestingly enough. We didn't talk about pricing either. I priced mine what I thought was fairly high. It turns out I probably have gone higher. Nobody said a word about that. Bill, you actually didn't get into the pricing strategy, as I understand it.
I did not. I didn't have to go down that particular road. But as far as titles goes, I just kind of grabbed that one out of the air on Riding the Air, which I thought sounded a lot better than on Breaking Wind. So anyhow, any other questions?
By the way, I think Bill's book is woefully underpriced. The publisher picked those numbers. But that's, with traditional publishers, often you take what they give you, and that's a good example. Great, you can all go back and get started writing your book right now. I will look forward to reading them a year or two from now.